Welcome to the Billion Insights podcast. I'm your host Sri, and we have an exciting episode for you. Today, our guest is Kristina Smeriglio. She is a published author with a background in psychology and NLP, which is Neuro-Linguistic Programming. Her debut novel, Falling into Fire, explores deep and personal topics like relationships, identity. Through her writing, she shares her own journey of overcoming mental health challenges and trauma, turning her pain into art. Her work aims to empower others to understand and heal from their experiences. So, without further ado, let's welcome Kristina. So, welcome, Kristina. Welcome to the Billion Insights podcast.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
So, Kristina, can we start from the beginning? Let's start with your childhood.
Okay.
Yeah.
Where do you want me to start as far as my childhood concerned?
Yeah. So, you were born and raised in America, right?
Yes, born and raised in America, specifically Miami, Florida.
Hmm. Your surname suggests that you might be Italian. Are you of Italian heritage?
I do have Italian in me. Yes, I am mostly Cuban. So
Hmm.
my family is primarily Cuban, but I do also have Italian heritage in me through my father's side, hence the last name. Yes.
That's interesting. If I'm not mistaken, you are in your late 20s or early 30s.
Early 30s, correct. I'm 33 years old.
Okay. So you grew up in 1990s America, right?
Correct? Yes.
Yeah.
Specifically,
So
yes.
yeah. So how is like growing up in America in 90s?
It's interesting. I've never thought about it so much like that before. I've thought about the 90s as far as we get these nostalgic posts about certain things that were around. And as far as how things were for me, I don't know if this is like a 90s thing necessarily, although I do
Mm-hmm.
think some of it is, but I grew up with a lot of family surrounding me. So I was always with my family, primarily more so than friends, let's say from school. I was mostly with my family and relatives. And I would say I spent a lot of time traveling. I spent a lot of time traveling. I spent a lot of time playing outside. I would make friends with my neighbors, and we would, something that I think is very 90s that doesn't really happen, at least not in my neighborhood anymore, the
Mm-hmm.
neighborhood that I grew up. But I would go outside. So we kind of knew, we rode on the bus together. We kind of knew, okay, everybody finish your homework quick. And, in a few minutes or 30 minutes or so, let's come outside and we'll meet outside by, so and so's house and the air conditioner thing outside. And we would meet there. We would play for a few hours outside after we finished our homework. And it's interesting because nobody does that anymore. Not that I've seen anyway. I know that the times have changed, but I know that was very much like in the 90s. It was very common that, we had a quick routine as far as we got home. We ate, we finished our homework. I would say that our homework usually took like 30 minutes maximum, if that. And then we were immediately outside, and the majority of our time in the afternoon was spent outside with neighbors. And then once it was dinner time, our parents would kind of step outside. They would see us. They would call to us because, we didn't have phones at that time. So it would just be like, hey, Christy, okay, let's go. And every parent kind of would call their child. That was something that was very important to me and, my group back then. But overall, just like I said, a lot of family members, a lot of, understanding the world through, at least the rest of the world through television, right? We listened to television, radio, although the TV back then wasn't the same thing as it is now. But, it was something that I love, just a memory that came up to me, where you live in the world of streaming now.
Yeah.
But back then when I wanted to see something at a certain time, I don't know, I guess I got this from my grandmother and my mom, but I became an expert at putting a VHS tape. So I had like a TV, I believe, that had a VHS type slot in it, or I also had like the VHS player, and it was connected to the TV. And I would set it up so that at a certain time it would record what was on TV. So I became an expert at recording my favorite shows. Like when I was younger, it was the Rugrats, and when I was a little bit older, it was Boy Meets World, because those were like episodes I always had to see. And then so I would record it on the video. So I started recording the videos to watch them later. Like, okay, we're gonna go out, with my family, but I'm like, I have to set my show. And I thought that was interesting, and it's very telling of back then, right? Because we don't do that anymore. We don't have to do that anymore. We
Yep.
just, turn it on.
Yep.
It was fun. So those are just some highlights of my childhood that I could think of off of the top of my head.
So when did you first introduce to a computer?
So with a computer, so I remember when I was very young, I believe computers had always been around. My memory doesn't serve me perfectly.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember, I want to say I was probably 4 or 5, maybe around there, because I remember being very little. And
Mm-hmm.
I had moved with my mom to my grandparents' house, and they had a computer there. I want to say it was like a Macintosh computer, like the regular Macintosh computer, the that was out during that time, I guess the 90s version. And yeah, I remember like the cute little like rainbow apple icon. I don't know if my memory is serving me perfectly, but I remember it about then being about the time that I was first introduced to computers, and we used it to like make mostly play games. You know,
Mm-hmm.
like little games. I had a few little games there
Mm.
that we used to play, but yeah, something like that around that time. Yeah.
So what about the internet? When you introduced to the internet?
So that I feel like my memory is telling me that it was when I moved into my new house. So after my mom got remarried
Mm-hmm.
to my dad now, we moved into a house. I was about like 6.5, 7 years old, and it was in that house that I was introduced to the internet. So, like I said, my memory doesn't serve me perfectly as to maybe an age, but I
Mm-hmm.
remember shortly after that, like my mom had a computer I guess I was, oh, maybe it was like 1999, maybe, because I remember her getting a Windows. I remember her having a Windows in her closet. And I remember like the startup of the Windows computer. And on
Mm.
there, I had like, AOL, MSN.
Mm.
So it's hard to like pinpoint an actual age, but I was still relatively young when all of that came into play. But yeah, I remember being in her closet and it's like, we had to be mindful of the phone because we couldn't use the internet and also be able to use the phone because they were linked. So
Mhm.
I had to like tell my mom, hey, I'm going to go use the internet now. And it was dial up and it would take like minutes. It felt like forever
Yeah.
to load the internet. And then, it'd be like, you got mail. And that was like the most exciting thing to hear from AOL was that I got mail,
Mhm.
even though like I didn't really like have anybody to be sending me at that point. But it was
Mhm.
mostly something that was common, I guess, in my childhood too, with the use of the internet specifically, was a
Mm.
lot of those like interactive kind of cards. So like
Mm.
a thinking of you card, a happy birthday, Merry Christmas. Like my family, the women in my family got really into that for a while. So we would send each other cute little cards like that we would pick for them. And I think that that's something that I took into my friendships also. I want to say like middle school. Like if
Mhm.
every time I had a close friend and I, got their email address, I would send them like maybe like a funny card, or with my cousins. It was something like that. But definitely with like the adult women in my family, we would send it to each other, my mom, my grandmother, and I would search like through holidays and see like, oh, does it have any music, any animation? And then you could write like a cute little message. And that's
Mhm.
something that doesn't happen anymore. Like my family, they're just not about that. If that's not in their mind anymore, then they
Mhm.
might just go to like the Dollar Tree and get like a regular card now, which is funny. It's like it used to be regular cards. Then that
Mhm.
became popular for a while. And then now we're like back to regular cards. But it was a really nice time because I could just be there browsing through the different cards and seeing how to personalize them, like from the comfort of my computer. And it was
Mhm.
audio, right? Like it had its different little animations. So that was something that was, while I was growing up, that stood out to me. I actually thought
Mhm.
about it like the other day. I'm like, I kind of want to get into, these touchstones throughout the year with certain relatives to send them like cute, cards
Mhm.
or things like that. So yeah, but that was something around the time when I was introduced to the internet.
That's interesting. So coming to the present day, how your typical day usually look?
So now on my typical day, so like let's say my typical day is like Monday to Thursday. I work at Miami-Dade College. So if I was to describe, let's say yesterday is a good
Mhm.
example of a typical day. I wake up at my house. I'm living with my new husband. I just got married like 2 months ago now. Oh no, not even just
Congratulations.
1 month ago. I got
Oh.
married. Thank you. I got married June 21st. So however long that's been already, I feel like time has been flying by. So I live with him.
Mm.
And, I also woke up. We had our two stepdaughters, my two stepdaughters,
Mm.
his two daughters. So I wake up, I see my dog, see them,
Mm.
and if they're awake. And then I go to work, and I work at Miami-Dade College. So I'm currently a writing tutor. So I bring my writing expertise to the students at Miami-Dade College. That's like a community college here. It's
Mm.
not, back in my time, it used to be called the community college. Now it's just called Miami-Dade College. But for reference, it is a school that primarily focuses on the first 2 years of studies here in America.
Mhm.
So it primarily focuses on getting the associate's degree. I do believe it has some 4-year programs, and it is working on gaining a lot more. It is a very progressive, innovative type of school
Mm-hmm.
focused on growth. So, but primarily it does have those first 2 years. So I work there as a writing tutor. I work with the students taking ENC 1101, ENC 1102, which is the English composition courses that are required as part of most programs, college programs, university programs here in the United States. So I work with those students. I also work with a program. It's called English for Academic Purposes. And those are courses that are taken prior to the English composition course. And it's for students who are international students who may have come from another country and are looking to get a degree here, at the Miami-Dade College School.
Mm-hmm.
So they have to master the English language before doing that. So they come that course and they learn all the grammar rules, writing, practice speaking, listening, reading. So I work with those students as well who are international, right? Where English is not their first language, but they are hoping to gain mastery over the English language. So I spend most of my day doing that. Then I get home, and on a regular Thursday, which is, kind of mirrors some other days of the week, I do private tutoring. So that is not limited to writing. However, that is my expertise, right? But I do also do any subject. I actually have a student now that he's in college. He happened to be taking English this term, so I was helping him with that. But I also help with, selecting classes, researching classes, organization, staying on top of things, so my tutoring is not only just getting the academic work done, but also some certain life skills depending on the student and what they may need specifically, and that's where I bring in a lot of my psychology and NLP backgrounds, it kind of brings it all together. So I do some of that private tutoring. Then, I eat with my family, maybe watch a movie, a couple episodes of a series I'm watching, hug my dog 20,000 times a day. And then, take a shower, go to sleep. It's probably the bulk of my day, I would say.
Thanks for being so open about your typical day and sharing all those details.
Yeah, I thought of the detail. That's something that I do. I notice sometimes certain memories or certain moments will kind of want to be shared in detail. So, I like to bring that personalization to the conversation.
Yeah. Just a side note, I want to say something to you that I really love your energy.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I'm actually surprised I have this much energy at this hour. I just woke up, but
Yeah.
I'm happy to be on the call here. So, thank you.
My pleasure. So, talking about the energy, what's the secret behind your energy?
Honestly, this energy is not to be found on a typical day.
Mm-hmm.
But I do find a lot of joy in having conversations like this. I love to talk and have conversations with people, and this type of platform, this kind of podcast conversation, I don't know, it gives me life type of thing. I love to share my experiences, and I honestly, I feel honored that, especially with some of the questions that you're asking me here today, to be thinking of these memories, to be thinking of kind of how I got here, right? That's something that's super important to me, thinking of how I became who I am. And it's interesting because those are some things that I hadn't necessarily thought about in a really long time. And so talking about it now, to me, that gives me life, so I would say anybody looking for energy, find something you love, and if you have an opportunity to do it, do it, and for me, these kinds of conversations is what does it for me.
Do you think your education in psychology influenced your energy?
Maybe. I would say definitely psychology has influenced my work, especially with my writing and just engaging with people, right? So the idea of coming to understand why people are the way that they are, how they got to where they're at, maybe understanding behaviors. NLP did that too. I would say that even just the practice of trying to get to know where someone is at in order to help them, I would say that kind of approach, right, where you're trying to get to know someone, asking them questions, maybe they're asking you questions, maybe I'm sharing because I have some experience in something that they are going through. And I feel sharing that could provide some support for them, whether or not they share with me what they're going through. I feel like sharing with others can give a little bit of context, if I'm ever in a position where I'm sharing any kind of advice, giving some of that background information is going to help. And it stems from this psychology background, I would say primarily. Maybe my family members would say that I've always loved to talk, but I would say that, although it is true, something that I thought about is back then I did used to talk. I do feel like there's always been a part of me that wanted to share. But I would say that back then, maybe I wasn't sharing, I didn't have the confidence to share everything that was going on inside of me.
Mhm.
I would just kind of maybe like want to share, but I would struggle. But then getting my psychology background, getting my
Mhm.
NLP background, getting my master's in writing,
Mhm.
actually publishing a book and sharing my story through writing, and
Mhm.
now I'm, sharing my story through speaking engagements. This
Mhm.
is something that, I finally feel I'm in a position to be fully myself, right? I've always believed in being fully myself, but my confidence levels, perhaps my self-esteem wasn't so much back then,
Mhm.
versus where it is now, where I've done a lot of healing, I've done a lot of personal growth. And so definitely my energy now is a lot better, right? So it's not just me using my voice and talking, just to talk. Now I'm actually using my voice and sharing things that I'm passionate about, sharing, the truth inside of me. And to me, I would say that that is definitely attributed to psychology and this background that I got with my education for sure.
Hmm. So can we say that you are a born extrovert person?
You know, I thought about that. I would say it's funny. I did one of those. I took a leadership course in when I was in university. I went to Florida International University for my bachelor's degree, and I
Hmm.
took a leadership course, and we took this test. I want to say Myers-Briggs. I'm not too sure, but like the code that came out for me was like ENFP. It's
Mhm.
a shame that I don't remember like the test itself. It was a long time ago, and I haven't kept up with studying it. But the E stood for extrovert.
Hmm.
And it's funny because as I've gotten older, like I wonder, like, am I really an extrovert? Because there are times where like I'll go somewhere and I know people, but like I get like really socially awkward. And I'm like, oh, I don't know, should I say hi? Like, especially if I go somewhere alone, there are times where like I don't know what I go through. And I'll just get like kind of a little bit awkward, like, oh, I don't know what to say. But then someone says hi to me and then it's like I get over it, and then I'm like super like, yeah, I guess extroverted in that sense. So I guess it comes from like soon as I feel that level of comfort and that
Mhm.
wall, maybe I have a little bit of shyness, or like I'm a little bit slow to open up. But soon as I get like the okay inside of me, like then definitely I would say I'm more of an extrovert. Like I don't know how I was so much when I was young. I think I was going through a lot of changes when I was young. And I think I did get through a period of being serious, finding my way a little bit, maybe wanting to be extroverted, but maybe struggling to be extroverted. But
Hmm.
definitely now, like I would say that me, when I'm at my full capacity, definitely like I would say I'm more of an extrovert. I want to share, I want to engage with people, making friends and having conversations with relatives is very important to me. Making memories in that way, and engaging with my, with my husband and my children.
Hmm.
I love to share, right? I may not always have the energy to share. I get tired after work. I read a lot of essays, and then sometimes I'm like, I don't want to engage necessarily always. Sometimes I have my periods of hibernation and rest. But when those energy levels are there, like I love to engage. So definitely I would say extroversion is, a big part of who I am and finding that joy in life and just being able to connect with others. And I do it
Mhm.
through that, through sharing and just having, an open personality to engage with others. So I would say, yeah.
Mhm. Hmm. In this podcast, the Billion Insight podcast, we often break the complex topic into the digestible insights, you know. So, as a
Yeah.
psychology student yourself, from a psychological perspective, what are the key difference between extrovert and introvert?
I wouldn't say I'm an expert at that, but something that I've noticed, I
Mhm.
do think this sense of openness, at least in my experience when I've had my bouts of introversion versus extroversion, I would say like the sense of, I guess, willingness to be open, perhaps.
Hmm.
Maybe not a willingness, I would say, because I do think sometimes extroverted people, they have their ways of connecting, right, with those closest to them. But I would
Hmm.
say maybe with like in the general audience, right? If you're in a place with a bunch of people, right? I would say that me as an extrovert, I am open to communicating with whoever kind of wants to come my way, as
Hmm.
opposed to maybe focusing on the immediate conversation with the person next to me. I mean, once I do connect with someone, I'm like zoned in on that
Mhm.
person, right? It's not like I'm focused on everyone on the outside. I do kind of get that sense of like this is a moment between me and that person.
Hmm.
But I would say more of like a outgoing sense where it's like, okay, I'm here. I guess more, I want to say like loud, but I know that that's not the word. It's not exactly, volume necessarily, but I would say it's a certain presence, right, that
Hmm.
somebody brings to an audience. I would say that the extroverted person is maybe one of like, it's going to be noticed. They typically are very communicative with the general audience that might be there. They might
Hmm.
be laughing, smiling. And I think that the introverted person might also be doing those things, but in their like closer inner circle in any given audience. And maybe they will speak in that way once approached. It's really hard to say. I'm trying to think about, I do think that like I try to think about me and my husband, let's say, I am more extroverted versus he is more introverted, where
Hmm.
he'll definitely engage in conversation, but he may not start the conversation. So that's what I
Initial.
guess like might be like yeah, exactly. Like he's not gonna initiate necessarily. So I
Hmm.
think now that I'm kind of thinking about it, that's where we might have some differences. Sometimes I get to a place and I might not initiate, but for the most part, if I'm in a place where I'm comfortable, right? In that sense, I have that green light. I see someone I recognize or I see someone that I want to talk to, and I will go initiate conversation. So I think that's where that difference might lie. Like I said, I'm
Okay.
not super well versed in the differences, but that's something that I've noticed in like this real world kind of difference where,
Hmm.
I might be more open to engaging and socializing, being more social in a bigger audience type of
Yeah.
thing. And maybe
Yeah.
even get on stage, to and do things like this, have these types of conversations. Whereas an
Hmm.
introverted person might share themselves in different ways and with different size audiences, you know?
Yep, yep, yep. I do consider myself as an introvert person, but since I put me into this situation as a podcaster, so I always have to initiate the conversation.
Right. Exactly, right. But yeah, so you would know like the difference. Do you find yourself like as far as engage like would you say that the initiation otherwise, like other than the podcast, is kind of like that key difference for you? Like what do you think makes you an introvert personally?
Well, I always find myself doing something all the time. People often say that they get bored when they are alone. But for me, I never get bored, especially when I am alone, because one way or other, I know how to entertain myself. In my free time, I often engage in reading, writing, watching. So basically, I know how to entertain myself when I find myself alone.
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh, definitely. I do think that that's characteristic, right? Like you can be, very independent, focused on the task at hand, like you say.
Yep, yep.
Um, yeah, I can see that. I can see that. Yeah, it's funny. My husband is very much like that. Even though it's interesting because there are times where, as a writer, I do need my alone time, and I love being alone. Like I truly love being alone.
Mhm,
I think it's from like a sense of being like overstimulated sometimes,
mhm.
where I can really be alone for like all day. It really
Yeah.
doesn't, I do find joy in that. But I do notice there will come a time where I'm like,
Mhm.
where are my people? Right? Like I want to engage,
Yeah, yeah.
So I go through those periods and I guess that could be a difference, right? Whereas the introverted person is like doing their own thing and can probably be alone most of the time and focused on their task. Um,
Mhm.
like they probably wouldn't be into like a group project type of thing. They would probably prefer the independent project if I was to think of it in like a educational kind of setting. Whereas maybe an extrovert, I had a
Yeah.
friend who was more of an extrovert than me,
Mhm.
and she was very much like leadership position, and she's like, okay guys, this is what we're gonna do. So very much like delegating tasks, and then maybe the introvert in the group will be like, all right, cool, that's what I'm doing, go off on their own, do the task, come back. So yeah, it's interesting, but I do think that they work well together,
Yeah.
despite their differences. I think that each person brings, something special to the table. And it's kind of like this symbiotic relationship, especially like in a group setting or a family setting. Having the different personalities kind of shapes the environment, and I think that having both, works really well. But that's really cool to hear about how you identify as an introvert and that you love, doing your task. I think that's great. But yeah, you're putting yourself out there here with this podcast. And I think that's amazing. You're connecting with people all over the world. I love that.
I wanted to do this for a long time, but I couldn't able to. But this year I just decided no matter what will happen, I will start. So I started my
And
journey as a
that's what you
podcaster
have
in
to
this
do.
year.
That's amazing. Sometimes it's about like just actually getting started. There
Yep.
are things where I kind of think about myself, like that happens to me where I'm like, okay, I'm ready to write my second book, don't know what to write, but The other day, I'm like, all right, let's go to like a cafe or something, because when I'm feeling like I have like no discipline, I'm like, okay, I have to get out. So I would leave my house and I'll be like at a cafe, Books and Books is a company that's here. It's like independent type bookstore that sells all types of books, but it's more like a boutique type of bookstore. And they have a cafe there. They have a bar outside with like lights, like a lounge type of outdoor naturey type of setting. And, I just went there and I wrote, and it's like, to have that discipline. So I love that you decided for yourself, like, okay, like this is something I've always wanted to do. Like, we're just going to get started, right? Like, and you figured things out along the way. And from what I can tell, you're doing really well for yourself. So I applaud you for, having your idea and like just going for it. That's amazing.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Both of us publicly acknowledge that you are extrovert and I am introvert. So, according to
Right.
you, so as per you, what are some disadvantages of being an extroverted person?
The disadvantages, I would say the disadvantage for me, because I've become very vulnerable around certain people. I would say this happens around people that know me, right? Like they've already met me, maybe not
Mm-hmm.
necessarily a stranger that I just met, but by people that know me, because I've kind of put myself in this vulnerable position to be seen. If I'm having an off day, like, man, they will come at me and be like, what's wrong with you? Like, I know something's off. And I'm like, like, I don't feel well. Like, I don't want to talk. You know what I mean? Like, because then I'll get very, like, into myself, right? Like, I'll kind of want to hide. Like, even if I'm in a setting where, like, especially like in a family setting,
Mm-hmm.
where I'm like, okay, I'm with my parents, let's say, and I'm feeling, some type of way because I'm usually so extroverted. When I'm
Mm-hmm.
feeling off, man, they will like come at me, be like, "What's wrong with you?" And I'm like, I don't necessarily want to talk about it right now. But definitely, I would say there's almost like a magnifying glass sometimes on me. Whereas, like, if I was introverted, maybe didn't share so much, then the person who's noticing has to be very like acute in their awareness to notice the subtle shifts in me,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because maybe if I'm just like kind of like have like a regular face, like my typical kind of resting face, and I'm just there off to the side and quiet. If I was normally like that, right? Like kind of just do myself and more quiet in that aspect, they wouldn't necessarily notice, right? But because I can be so talkative and so extroverted and outgoing, if I'm having an off day, like man, like they will like zoom right at me, be like, "What's wrong?" And that could be a disadvantage to me because there are times where, although I can express myself so much better now than I could ever express myself in my life, you know, some of these challenges are new, right? So having to talk about them sometimes it's a little bit, stressful for me if it just happened, it's an event that just happened and I maybe am not ready to talk about it. Although with my parents now, I might have like a little bit of a moment of like I don't want to talk about it, but eventually I will talk about it. But yeah, I will say like
Mm-hmm.
that disadvantages is like they can notice real fast if something is wrong because it's like what's like why does she look like that? Why is she not engaging? Why is she not laughing? Why is she so definitely a
Mm-hmm.
disadvantage when I'm going through something.
Mm-hmm. I can totally see that. Even I also sometimes, see myself in a situation where people think me that I have some, ego issue or something like that. So that's why I'm not communicating with them. People sometimes misunderstood me that I don't want their company. So that's why I'm not talking to them. But it's not true. This is my nature. I usually don't like to hang out with all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like a misconception just
Yeah.
because you're introverted like oh, you don't want to talk to people or like you have some kind of negative association, but no, it's really not that, right? Like you
Yeah.
just find if I may speak, like your best energy is, you're independent, right? And you're just doing your thing. It's not necessarily, it might not be necessarily like against anybody else.
Yep.
It's just that you are good where you're at, right? And that's how you best function. And why should we not be our best selves, right?
Yep. Yep. Yep.
I totally feel you. I totally feel you. Sometimes it's like you kind of have to explain, oh, I'm doing my own thing, like, and I think that the people who want to be around you are gonna understand that, right? Like I have people in my family like that too, and I've just come to understand it, and I just try to be aware of how people are
Mhm.
feeling, and okay, look, they're ready to engage now. All right, cool, we're gonna
Yep.
engage, and then I'll take advantage of that moment because I realize that they've become vulnerable and they're
Mhm.
open despite maybe being introverted. They're coming with a sense of openness to, to where I'm at. So, I'll definitely, engage and follow how they are feeling. But yeah,
Mhm.
like it's never that, oh, you just don't like people or anything like that. It's just, yeah, we have different rhythms, I would
Yep,
say, and it's
yep,
great. Yeah.
yep. So, Christina, have you read the book called How to Analyze People on Sight? It's a very old book.
I haven't, no, but that sounds awesome. I would love to analyze on site. I probably know some of the techniques of that, but I've never read that book. No.
Do you believe in this MBTI technique, that is the pseudoscientific technique? You know, the
Okay.
MBTI, Myers-Briggs Type Indicator. You know, the 16personality.com. Have you come across that?
Is that the one that I was talking about earlier, the ENFP
Okay,
and
yeah.
INFP, INTJ? Is that?
Yeah, that one.
I'm aware of it, yes. So I've taken the test before. I took it as part of the leadership course that I took at FIU, but
Mhm.
I haven't read more about that so
Okay.
much.
So, Christina, why it's important to understand human behavior?
So, the first thing I want to say is like, we're not alone on this planet, right? Like we're a lot of people. So naturally,
Mhm.
despite our personalities, whether introverted or extroverted, and all the different traits that are a part of ourselves, our personalities, we're always going to have some sort of engagement, whether it's
Mhm.
with our immediate family members or if it's in a bigger audience, work setting, school setting, things like that. And we're
Hmm.
always engaging with people. And I think that to have successful relationships, because there are challenges, because
Hmm.
people are going through tough times, like, obstacles are a part of growth. I think that by understanding human behavior,
Hmm.
it at least provides me with the opportunity to maybe have a better understanding what that person is going through, maybe beyond what they might say.
Mhm.
Although, speaking is also a behavior,
Hmm.
but there's verbal behaviors and there's nonverbal behaviors. And I think that by understanding behavior in general, we can have a sense of what someone is going through and be able to be there for them in ways that, maybe we wouldn't be able to otherwise. I notice a lot of times people go through things and they may not share what they're going through at all, or they may not share it directly. But
Mhm.
by looking at behaviors, we get this greater, even the sense of not sharing completely or honestly is a behavior in of itself. So for me, understanding behavior gives me a bit of context of what someone is going through. And if I care about somebody a lot, like my family members, understanding what they're going through, not only will
Hmm.
I not take things personally, right? Because sometimes, if I was just to take behaviors at face value, there
Hmm.
might be a lot more fights in my life. Um, but you know what I mean? Because there are some times where like I feel like, why is this happening? But by
Hmm.
understanding, psychology, having that background, having a NLP background, it gives
Hmm.
me a little bit of more understanding and frankly compassion,
Hmm.
because I can understand that they might be going through something, and it
Hmm.
allows me the opportunity to be there if they need somebody, right? And this is a presence that I wouldn't be able to have had I not studied human behavior, had
Hmm.
I just, gone through it, blind, let's say, and not known anything. I
Hmm.
wouldn't, I might be unable to engage with others, right? Because, with the struggles that I went through, even with what I went through personally,
Hmm.
by understanding myself, it gave me the opportunity to kind of really see like, why were these things happening, in the sense of like, why am I in this position? Like, why am I? Because yeah, I may be extroverted, and openly expressing myself now, but that was very difficult for me growing up, because a lot of things happened to me that really didn't, it dampened my self-esteem significantly. It was like on the floor, and I had like
Hmm.
no confidence. But by studying behavior, I could analyze, what are some of the things that happen? How am I presenting myself? And so even now as an adult, I get to kind of see why, others may be feeling the way that they are feeling. And it's by looking at behaviors that I even notice something has changed.
Hmm.
So I think that it's important when it comes to having relationships with others to understand human behaviors and be able to then be there
Hmm.
for them. I would say is the main thing.
So, Christina, can you explain what NLP is for those who might not familiar with it?
Yes. So NLP is neuro-linguistic programming. It is a study of the brain, the structure of the brain, how it works with
Hmm.
linguistics, right, which has to do with words
Hmm.
and language. And the programming is kind of, the programming have this hardware, right, our brains, and we have language, and it comes together and it kind of shapes us and our behaviors. And one of the parts of NLP that's important to me is understanding. It's basically a way of understanding, how communication comes in, right? How information comes in, how we filter that information, right? Through our experiences, through our beliefs, our values, how it then is presented to us, creates sort of like this mind movie, right? This experience that we have. And because it's gone through those filters, it's then going to influence the behavior, our output, right? So the input is the information that comes in, it goes through us, and then we have this output that's the behavior, right? And it's a study that by understanding it, it's informed me a lot on how to engage with people better. I kind of paired it with psychology a bit, but NLP has given me techniques to engage with people because now I'm more aware of these things, right? Because not everybody's going to respond the same way to any given stimuli, right? Like any given experience, they're not going to respond the same way. And why is that, right? Well, they have their filters, they have, beliefs, their values, their past experiences, they're distorting the information, right? So by understanding neuro-linguistic programming, you can kind of understand why someone does that. And this study, this understanding is not only used to understand others, but in the case that anybody wants to connect with people further, one of my favorite things is representational systems, right? So visual, auditory, kinesthetic. By understanding someone's preferred system, we can, change our language in order to communicate with them, because what I've found is that a lot of times disagreements happen because they're saying, they're speaking a different language, right? Well, someone might say, I see what you're saying. And the other person is more auditory, like, oh, I hear what you're saying. And then there's a bunch of examples, but essentially what it comes down to is when people have different preferred systems, they could be talking to each other and everybody's using their language to connect. But since the other person doesn't speak the same language, right, there's a disconnect there. And by taking that apart, you get to see where the commonalities are despite a difference in language. Me as a practitioner, I can, notice someone's preferred system and I can speak in that language to say the same thing that I would have said in maybe my own preferred language, but now I'm going to speak it in theirs because I'm trying to connect, right? So I'm going to notice these things. I'm going to speak these things in order to share what I'm trying to say, to make sure that they, at least do my best to make sure that they can hear it. So I do love that, to notice people's preferred systems and how they communicate in their unique language. But my other favorite thing is precision questioning. So this is something that I've done with myself. It's essentially like getting to the specifics of any given topic, right? So by asking precise questions and following up with more questions, if I kept it as, oh, how was your day today? That's going to give an answer, right? Versus like, oh, maybe what was the highlight of your day? What was, or you tell me, oh, I did this today. Oh, well, tell me more about that. Or what is it about this that you liked, right? So just kind of like, that's like a very, surface level kind of example there. But the idea is you start with these questions and you really get to the heart of what someone's trying to say, right? Because they may not give it to you right away. So neuro-linguistic programming is a way of kind of understanding. It's definitely a model to understand human behavior. And I love it for that reason, because it gives me the context to know, maybe why someone is doing what they're doing, how did they become this way? And it pairs with psychology, because the psychology is going to give like this scientific background, this different ways of looking at human growth and development versus neurolinguistic programming is kind of like the communications part of it, and how our brains work, and giving a language to these processes that are happening inside of us. So that's a little snippet of it, I would say. There's definitely more information out there about what it is, but those are some of my favorite things about it and why I feel connected to it. And it definitely it influences my day, and those are techniques that just by even understanding that someone's pessimistic versus optimistic, right? And even in their language, it's not about like positive or negative. It's just the way that the person sees the world, right? Or they're more about, big chunk of ideas versus, small chunk of ideas and tasks, by understanding how someone functions best, right? There could be a better, especially as a professional, right? Like if I'm working with a student and I noticed that I gave them a bunch of edits on their paper and they broke down, I'm like, okay, well, that didn't work. Right. So sometimes a lot of this is like trial and error, right? But that's something that I noticed. Instead of maybe forcing the issue, if I work with them again, maybe I'll do like small snippets at a time, take a break, let's explain them, instead of just giving them a million edits and explaining nothing. right? Other
Mm-hmm.
people might see that and be like, I got this, but maybe for that particular student, they need smaller pieces at a time. And then,
Mm-hmm.
over a longer period of time to complete a project. So in my position, it is wise for me to know this so that I can be a better, professional, better at my job. So
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a great, source of information to, especially when you're in a position of helping others. That's like a little bit about that.
Yeah. So, Kristina, how NLP is being used in industry?
How is it used in industry?
Yep, like customer services, language translation. Is there any other application of NLP which is being used in an industry?
Well, I think NLP is being used in a lot of industries, even when someone doesn't know what NLP is. But I know in my inner circle, so
Hmm.
I actually studied NLP and I met this woman. She became like a lifelong friend of mine. Her name's Liz Becker. But she actually used her experience in NLP to create a training program to train others. And a lot of the professionals that are taught, she actually started a company called the National Association of Divorce Professionals. So these divorce professionals are anybody that touch on the divorce process. So we
Hmm.
have all manners of attorneys, mental health professionals like psychologists, psychiatrists, real estate professionals helping people buy homes, and finance, right? So anybody in the finance world. And
Hmm.
part of helping them to become better professionals with their clients, she's taught this. And I was actually a part of creating the training manual for the course that she created to help these professionals become even better at serving their clients. And it's amazing to see how even just being given that little bit of information has helped them become better professionals, right? Because another part of that is building rapport, right? So NLP is very big on building rapport with others and how to build rapport, how to maintain rapport, and even just understanding someone's language is a huge part of that, right? So seeing this
Hmm.
in industries like that, right, where you're dealing with sensitive information, right, because the clients that you are serving are going through a lot. Even these professionals, when they're not helping divorce clients, these professionals, you're dealing with sensitive information in those industries. So by understanding NLP, they are better able to serve their clients. So that's, an
Hmm.
industry that I see it used, at least in my community. I've seen it firsthand. I've been a part of creating training programs for it.
Hmm.
And like I said, I use it in my industry. I use it in education. And I do
Hmm.
think that the educational field, whether or not they call it NLP, right? I do think that, professors, teachers, tutors, anybody in the school system that deals with students and deals with
Hmm.
learning is going to want to understand something about their learning style. So, like I said, maybe it's not called NLP, but just understanding that student's preferences of some, in some capacity, even if it is that they're a visual learner. Like that's something
Hmm.
that's in NLP that maybe in the educational system they call it, something else, some other learning theory. But
Hmm.
it's definitely there, whether or not we know that it's there, we know that we're practicing it, but I've seen it a lot. Anybody that has like a client facing business.
That's interesting. I mean, NLP is alone is a very big subject.
Yeah.
Yep. How does your background in psychology influence your writing?
Yeah, so definitely I would say my background in psychology influenced my writing. I mean, my first book to me is like a psychological undertaking, right? Because I was really trying to understand why certain things had happened to me, why I was acting a certain way in certain situations. And so having the psychology background, I was able to look at myself and but to be honest, even beyond my own story, in other stories that I've written or any other kind of writing that I have done, character development is a huge part of writing a story of any
Hmm.
kind. And so understanding, human behavior, human growth and development is very crucial to telling a story because by understanding people, we can then give them, these attributes, whatever it is the story that we're trying to tell. And I've noticed that my psychology background has found its way into that. I've understood characters a certain way and I've approached the creation of characters a certain way because I'm thinking, okay, what's going on, as far as their psychology is concerned, what's their mindset, what are their behaviors that are happening, maybe because of something that happened in their past, right? So having that psychology background helps me approach character development a certain way. And even my own story, it was very much psychology based, just like analyzing the thoughts. It was almost like to me, it was like a therapy session where she's kind of like this like mode of self discovery, right? And self exploration. And
Hmm.
she's really trying to understand why these things are happening, why she's not
Hmm.
happy. why is she unable to engage in the way that she feels she wants to engage. So having a psychology background definitely influenced my writing in that way. And that's related to the topics that I write about, to give that kind of this example of what that self-exploration looks like, which is very much from the psychology standpoint.
Hmm. Some people want to write books, but they never complete their projects. You know, what psychology factor contribute to
Yeah.
this?
It's hard to say, like immediately offhand
Hmm.
what it is, because I think that everybody is different. I know for me, even though I have written a book, even the journey of writing it was a struggle for me. Sometimes, the issue of procrastination was
Hmm.
heavy, and I would use a million excuses as to, oh, I'm tired from working, I'm tired in general, I'm hungry, I'm sleepy. But I
Hmm.
noticed for me was that I discovered that there was something, if I was to then write that thing, it was
Hmm.
almost like a sense of like self-sabotage, because I knew that by writing my story, I was going to heal. Right? But I was so used to living a certain way, right?
Hmm.
So it's like, if I heal, my life is going to change. If I heal, I'm going to change. My life is going to be different. And even though it's everything that I want, you
Hmm.
know, I was used to living a certain way. So I think sometimes even if we're unhappy, we stay in like this comfort zone, and that'll influence our behaviors. And I know for me, like I said, I was in that comfort zone of like not moving forward. And even people's beliefs about me were in line with that, right? Like a lot of people are like, oh, you're not gonna finish. Oh, you're not really a writer. Oh, like, like since when do you write? Or anything, just like because I was trying something new. I had a psychology background. I had, these different backgrounds. And
Hmm.
so it was almost like, people's perceptions of me influenced me. And I'm like, I started questioning myself, like, yeah, like, who am I to write a book? Eventually, all those doubts like disappeared from everybody's minds. As soon as I got
Hmm.
a book deal, like the game changed. But especially as I was working on it, it was tough to overcome that. And especially because of what I was writing about. I didn't want to recall a lot of these, even though I knew that by recalling them and writing about them, I was going to get better. There were
Hmm.
certain days where I'm like, I don't want to talk about that. And it would take me like there was a scene in particular that when I was writing the story as my master's thesis, it took me 2 weeks, like, to write it. Like, it was a
Hmm.
scene, it would have been done in like half an hour, but it took me like 2 weeks because I just didn't want to talk about it, because I knew I had to, but there was something inside me that's like, I'm going to have to confront this again, which was part of the journey. And understanding some of those psychological obstacles, it's like your life is going to change. Sometimes when we go through something traumatic, we can be kind of comfortable, at least knowing, like, even though this is like a negative situation, it's not ideal of a situation, it's not what we truly want. Because it's
Hmm.
happened for as long as it has, we can get like, we have safety in that. We have safety knowing like it's predictable, right?
Hmm.
Soon as we change, life becomes unpredictable. So I think sometimes, if anybody deals with any kind of like imposter syndrome or any kinds of obstacles from their past, sometimes finishing that book means changing their life, and not everybody's ready to change that, right? To write a book is to be vulnerable, right? Because
Hmm.
you're putting a part of you out into the public eye, and it could be tough to share that part of you. So I think that, it's hard to say about any specific person, but I can speak about myself, and knowing that there was like a little bit of self-sabotage there. But ultimately, to overcome it, to answer your question about what it took to overcome, ultimately the desire to be happy, the
Hmm.
desire to understand myself, the desire to change became far greater, right? I started getting like tired of myself. I'm like, Christy, like, that's it. Like, we've been like this for too long, even though it's comfortable, it's safe, it's predictable. Like, this predictability at the end of the day makes, I feel, bouts of depression, I'm anxiety, I feel anxious. And ultimately that wasn't the life I wanted to want. So no matter how comfortable I was, knowing that I had an idea, or at least the possibility of what was going to happen the next day, I knew I ultimately wanted to change. So
Hmm.
I was like, all right, time to be brave. And then that's what helped me write the story. And I figured, like, what's the worst that can happen? Like, even if everybody and their mother criticizes this story, I knew that by the act of writing it helped me overcome it.
Hmm.
And that's a possibility that it could help others, or even if it, at the end of the day, it only helped me, and nobody reads it, let's say like audience of literally me and my editor, it still provided that
Hmm. Hmm.
opportunity to heal and grow, which is something that can help others. So I think that when you are struggling to finish a project, if you think about your ultimate intentions for why you even started it in the first place, then you can start to pick away at what's stopping you from getting there. And this is something, my NLP background helped immensely, right? As far as like setting goals and well-formed outcomes. Once you kind of know where you're trying to reach and you can take a look at what's stopping you, then, thinking about that ultimate goal can help you shift and complete the project you want. And then that book will get written.
Yep. We have to focus on our ultimate goal. So, Kristina, what are some key techniques or hacks in psychology that can help improve our mental health?
I would say it's hard to name them. A lot of my work now really is focused on the writing, so it's hard to name some of these techniques. But I would say NLP maybe has more techniques at the top of my mind right now. But something that I learned with NLP, and I think psychology helped me too, because psychology gives you this sense of awareness, right? Like as soon as you understand all these different types of struggles somebody may be going through, any key moments in human growth and development, as soon as you become acutely aware of them, your mind shifts, right? The way that you look at the world shifts. And for me, just being aware of the types of communication models, the types of beliefs and distortions, and the ways that I might experience any given event, staying on top of mind of that, but ultimately keeping like, okay, what's the end goal here? Like, do I want to have healthy mental health? Like, how do I want to feel? And just becoming aware of like subtle shifts in energy. I would say like if something feels off, right? Like just take a moment, pause, question like what's happening here. And that to me has helped me a lot, and just like talk. I know it's not even like a technique, but like talk, like especially if it has something to do with someone else. Let's say that your engagement with somebody else is affecting you and you're feeling some type of way, take a moment to really notice what's happening, because I feel like one of the greatest things that has shifted in my life after having this background and writing about it is I'm no longer like a passive participant in my life. Like I'm not just like passively living life and going with the wind and reacting to people. A lot of times people live just reacting, right? And we don't even understand why we're reacting that way. Like we just say, oh, it's our personality. I react this way. But then we're just, like I said, kind of going with the wind sometimes. And like whatever a person's mood is that day, we'll just react to it. And then it affects our day. So emotional state management is huge, because if you notice, like, this is not, working, right? There's something negative that's happening here. There's a break in rapport, getting your mind right, getting to a place where you want to be, I think is a great, starting point. So as far as hacks, now that I am, processing the thought, emotional state management, that's a technique in NLP where you consider what is the best emotional state, or which is the one that you want to be in for any given moment. So let's say this is something, if I'm thinking of obstacles people may be going through, let's say someone has to give a presentation. Okay, well, what's a trait that I need for this presentation? Okay, I need confidence, let's say, like perfect example. Then, one can ask themselves, has there ever been a time where I've felt confident? It doesn't even have to be related to public speaking. It could just be a moment that somebody felt confident. Maybe you felt confident looking in the mirror, let's say. So, has there ever been a time where I felt confident? And then you really dive into that memory. Okay, what did I see, hear, feel? You kind of bring it into the present moment. And because memories serve as a way to like relive the experience, you can bring up that emotion, right? Like that sense of confidence in that particular example. And now your emotions have changed, right? Because you're putting yourself in this scenario of being confident, right? Like I said, even if it's not exactly the same type of experience, but you're still feeling confident, you're bringing that into this presentation, as opposed to, let's say, maybe you were feeling anxious. Instead of choosing to perseverate on being anxious and then just trying to give the presentation from a state of anxiousness, right? If you kind of recall this, you shift your emotions, you're able to help yourself, right? This is something as a professional, if I have a client that their emotion is not ideal for the session because, we have a lot of paperwork to go through, we have things to get done, and they're struggling, as a professional, I can help them shift their emotional state, right? It's like, okay, what would be a better emotional state, for what we're feeling right now? And sometimes it's literally like getting up and walking, right? And then that's going to shift your emotions because you're doing a physical activity. But I would say that becoming keenly aware of your emotional state and changing it, right? Like managing it as necessary is one of the greatest hacks anyone can go through. Like, and somebody might be confused, like, oh, but you're like changing how you really feel. It's like, yes, there's a change, but you have to think about like what's really going to help you in that given moment. Like I said, if you're coming to a presentation with anxiety, and anxiety does not help you, right? It does not serve you to be anxious in that moment, let's say. So by managing our emotions, now we can better present ourselves and have the experience that we're really looking for. So definitely emotional state management is one of those techniques that has helped me greatly. And I feel like it can definitely help others.
Emotional state management. That's interesting. So, Kristina, are you into yoga and meditation?
I used to do a bit more of meditation. I do sometimes still engage with meditation, mostly guided meditations. I have this prayer app that kind of gets me to think about certain things. I work really well with prompts, like getting, think about a time, so I guess it's like my psychology and NLP background that has me like, I like to be prompted to have my mind go a certain way. I would say meditation has always been a struggle for me. It's my mind is overactive, right? And writing serves me very well for that particular reason. So sometimes the act of writing is sort of like a meditation if I think of meditation as an amazing way to empty my mind. So I do have some experience, but maybe not as much experience as others. More like a sense of mindfulness, right? Like my background definitely makes me mindful. But yes, I do have some experience with it.
Meditation really helps with our mental health. It's a great way to reduce stress, increases calmness and clarity of mind.
Absolutely. I would say
Yeah.
that I could probably embrace some of that more.
Yeah.
It's tough, I think that as a writer, as an artist, there's so
Mm,
much information coming through me, right? Like
mm,
at any given moment, I'll have all sorts of ideas that come through, and
mm,
it's tough to kind of navigate that. But definitely, embracing meditation, embracing just like, yeah, like a sense of mindfulness, it
mm,
really helps mental health. I know in the past when I've done even guided meditations to really calm and refocus my mind, it's helped me greatly because now instead of being overwhelmed by anxious thoughts or just all consuming thoughts, the
mhm,
meditation has provided a way to really settle down and
mhm,
just clear my mind and be able to have clarity over any given situation, right? Because then now that hack, right, like that technique of meditation,
mhm,
it helps the well-being, but it also helps you now approach any given situation with a clearer mind, right? So I'm able to approach any challenges that I'm going through differently or just
mhm,
be in a better state of mind. So I definitely agree that it's an awesome technique
mhm.
and strategy.
Yeah. So, according to you, what are the some common misconception about psychology?
I guess the first thing that comes to mind, if I'm just going to kind of speak offhand here, that maybe, I think sometimes people approach psychology or like therapy, I guess seeking a psychologist. I think sometimes, I think in the past, I may have thought, oh, I'm going to go to a psychologist, a therapist, and they're going to answer my issue, right? They're going to give me a direct answer to what
Mm,
I'm going through. And I have noticed, at least even in my own experience and just the approach of assisting people, it's not always that a professional that you're working with
mm,
is going to give you a direct solution to what you're going through. They're not going to probably say in a session, oh, that's this, right? They may be able to take note of it, right? And
mm,
if in the chance that you're looking for a diagnosis, they could provide one of something that you're maybe struggling with. But there's not always going to be, like, I feel like psychology is very delicate, right? It's a delicate practice. You're dealing with intricate people, right? Like everybody is an intricate person. There's a lot of things that shape people to how they became to where they are. And I think sometimes the misconceptions that you're going to go to seek a psychologist or just even study psychology and you're going to get an answer. Oh, look, that's what I'm going through. Like that's not always the case. That you're just going to like diagnose yourself or you're going to receive a diagnosis and have a perfect answer to what you're going through. I think that psychology presents techniques, it does present solutions, but it's not like an overnight cure just because I understand psychology, just because I understand NLP, just because I've seen a therapist or worked with an NLP practitioner, doesn't mean that my issues were solved like overnight, or definitely not overnight, but it doesn't mean that they were solved so quickly, right? Like it's a starting point, and then it's about going into oneself and unpacking certain things. That's why sometimes, when you're working with these professionals, it takes its time, and rightfully so. So I would say sometimes people might think, oh, I'm going to go to a therapy session, or I'm going to go meet with this person, and I'm going to have a solution right then and there, and I'm going to feel 20 times better. You might feel, your emotion might shift, right? You might have emotional state management where you feel really good and you are in a better position than you were before. But that doesn't mean that there may not be work to do later, right? Because I feel like the more that we heal, sometimes things that are deeper tend to come out, and they tend to resurface. That's definitely what I've noticed with me, and I've noticed that this study of psychology is like lifelong, right? I know a lot of things about psychology. I know a lot of things about NLP. Even as a writer, I know character development, and I still have things that tend to come up, as new experiences get lived. So I definitely think that a common misconception is that you're going to get an answer right away and be fixed, like, or just, like we would at maybe in other scenarios. But I would say it can, depending on if it's caught early on, maybe it is a quicker fix and it's a behavior shift and it's done. But it's not the case for every single situation. And a lot of times, by the time someone does start to go on this dive, it does take a little bit longer to unpack everything there is to unpack. So I feel like you have to be willing to go deep if you're going to study psychology or seek a psychologist and really overcome some difficult moments.
Yep, that's true. People believe that their problem can be fixed overnight if they visit a therapist. So, moving on. So, Kristina, can you give us a brief synopsis of your book, Falling into Fire?
So a brief synopsis would be, like, I would say that Falling into Fire is really, one woman's journey into herself, into her psyche. And through the setting of the Renaissance painting, The Garden of Earthly Delights by Hieronymus Bosch, it's a journey of self-exploration where she confronts these traumas in the areas of relationships, identity, communication, sexuality, and she overcomes them by this confrontation with herself and her psyche. And she navigates this environment, and by living this environment and engaging with it, she really gets to see who she really is and what's brought her here and what's necessary to move forward. So it's a fantasy exploration of what I went through in my real life. It's a fantasy telling of that kind of experience.
Oh, so you used a fictional character to represent yourself, metaphorically.
Absolutely. So this story was really born from a time where, I was struggling to have healthy relationships rather, because, relationships did exist, but they weren't healthy. I wasn't feeling good about the things that were happening to me. I had a lot of difficult experiences growing up, and I couldn't understand why I wasn't overcoming them. I couldn't understand why I wasn't happy in any of my situations, and I wasn't finding these healthy relationships in my life. And writing has always helped me overcome a multitude of struggles. Ever since I was even in middle school, I would write poetry to understand what I was going through, and essays and things like that, even songs. So this story was a way, I feel like I used to want to write nonfiction. Like at that time, if I'm recalling that time, I had wanted to write in nonfiction, but there were certain things that I couldn't write about. Like I struggled even with presenting this information because, one of the things that I was asked is like, well, who are you to share this information? Like, you're a student, so I wasn't in no means an expert, right? And so I was struggling even to just confront these things in real life, right? Apart from that kind of sense of not feeling confident in sharing who I was, but I was struggling to face the music in a way. So in this fictional story, right, even when I first wrote it for fiction writing workshop while getting my master's, it eventually turned into my thesis and then this book. It was a way for me to think about these events, to confront these events without having to rely so much on my memory, right? Because a lot of times, like, all these experiences kind of distorted my memory, I feel. And I felt like the actual memory of it wasn't as important as the reality of what I was living with now, right? Like I kind of had this sort of like a psychosis, right? Like this issue that I was dealing with. So I had certain experiences that I recalled from memory vividly, but I didn't want to rely so much on that. And I think that a part of me couldn't fully encapsulate everything
Mm,
in a nonfiction realm, but by making it fantasy fiction and kind of creating this avatar through which I navigated my experiences, it kind of gave me more freedom to see, like, okay, what's showing up? So I'll be presented with a character in the painting, and then suddenly we have these traits that are coming out, these questions that are being asked. And I believe that the fantasy fiction genre allowed me to confront these things in a way that just like I was allowed to see like whatever came up. There's
mm,
going to be, the thoughts in the book mirror my real ones, right? So there's
mhm,
elements of nonfiction in this story, but there's certain elements. It was more to represent what I was going through in general and what I was able to confront at that given time. And by making it, having it be fantasy fiction, I think it was just, it was like intentional eventually, but I think that it happened unintentionally at first, because I was just in a position where I wanted to get over things. I was
mhm,
unhappy. I wanted to overcome. I wanted to heal. And the story presented itself. It's a fiction writing workshop. I had to write a story where the setting was the main character. And I didn't know what I was going to write. I didn't know I was going to write about my hometown or anything like that. We could either pick a real setting or a fake setting, or like, we create a setting.
mm,
And when I was exploring my options, I then thought about the painting, which I was shown in another class. And when I looked at the painting and I was just reflecting on it, that was like a whole journey even of itself. But I ended up fixating on a character in the end, on a female character.
mm,
And I was like, okay, if I was in there, like, what would my life be like? And then I just started engaging. And then these traumas that I had experienced, these difficulties with my mental health started showing up. And then suddenly I'm able to really talk about these things because it presented itself like a safe environment for me to discuss these difficult topics. So I think that the fictional version allowed me to explore these different issues in a certain way that gave me freedom to dive into my psyche in a creative way. And I love that it was like that. It's what I was able to do. Obviously, the story wanted to be told, because I wanted to heal. And which is why, like I was speaking about earlier, like there were times where I couldn't write certain scenes, right?
mm,
Because it was difficult for me to confront those events. But ultimately, I wanted to heal. So, like, that
mm,
part inside of me was so strong that, yeah, the story got written, and I embraced the fantasy fiction genre despite not being a genre that I was familiar with so much,
mm,
and didn't have too much experience writing. But
mm,
I embraced it because obviously I was into the psychology, into the NLP, wanting to heal, and that's how it showed up for me. So it was
mm,
an interesting journey, to say the least.
mm. That's interesting. Is there any other book which you're currently working on?
Thank you. Yeah, it's an interesting question. I feel like it's a difficult question for me to answer sometimes. So many ideas have come up.
Mm,
I've had, and I've kind of wondered, like, what's next, right? Like, I've considered diving more into that universe. I've considered even turning it potentially into a memoir. But lately, I definitely know that the next book I write is going to have pieces of me. I think that that's something that happens to pretty much every writer, right? Like some element of them is going to be in it.
mm,
I do feel like there's going to be, I'm sharing my story, but I'm interested to see, I have some time off from work now, and I've decided, I'm like, okay, a lot of ideas are coming through.
mhm,
What's going to be my next story that I'm going to dive into. So I don't have like a concrete answer as to what exactly it's going to be about, but I definitely feel something is coming through. So I'm excited to see. I'm going to have the discipline to make the space for it, because, it feels like a way of like procrastinating, right? Letting, my day to day get in the way. And I refuse to let that happen. So I'm going to follow your lead. You said you were going to do a podcast, and you're doing it. I'm going to set, the goal that I'm going to start my book.
mm,
So I'm definitely going to, think about that, reflect on it, meditate on it, to really see what that next one is. But there's definitely one in the works. It's
mhm,
just a matter of which one it's going to be and what it's going to look like.
mhm. So, Christina, in addition to your own writing, you also offer writing as a service. Can you tell us more about this aspect of your work?
Yes, so I do offer copywriting as a service. I offer ghostwriting as a service, book doctoring. What I've noticed is, and this is something that I didn't even think about before, like I knew copywriting existed, but it didn't really present itself as an opportunity for me. Like I didn't think of it that way until actually I briefly lived in Austin, Texas,
Mm,
and I was meeting with a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of young professionals, And I noticed that they were great at what they did. Maybe their messaging online didn't exactly portray that, and I would just like, I wouldn't always share that, but it's something that
Mm-hmm.
I did notice. But it's funny, it was something that one of my friends, she knew it, and she told me, she's like, look, I love what I do, but I have a hard time, sharing what I do, right, in writing, right, because she can present herself in person, but
Mm-hmm.
online, which is a huge, marketing tool, she struggled to present herself. So she asked for my assistance. And, using my psychology background, my NLP background, I was able to get to the heart of what she was really trying to say. And, word choice was a big thing. So I helped craft that message to be aligned with who she was and what she was offering. And, next thing you know, she told me, she told me about copywriting. So I did it for her, and I started doing it for others. And it became something that, I offer now.
You are also into book doctoring. So can you tell us what is book doctoring?
Yeah, so with book doctoring, it's a matter of making sure that, because I can review it for that, but
Mm-hmm.
if it isn't aligned with their message, that's where the book doctoring comes in. That's when I perform like a surgery on their manuscript,
Mm-hmm.
and I shift the language as necessary, or I shift the structure
Basically
of whatever is
paraphrasing it.
necessary to make sure that it's
Yeah.
aligned. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
paraphrasing, and I do it with the author. So my services are very like immersive. I'll do it like on a Zoom call, and we'll
Mm-hmm.
spend time there. Even when I do like edits, like, because part of it is the editing, right? So it's book doctoring
Mm-hmm.
because it's not only shifting language, but
Mm-hmm.
it's, the actual editing process to get it ready for publishing. I do
Mm-hmm.
it with the author, and I allow them to see all the changes,
Mm-hmm.
but they can really see. And then if there's anything that kind of stands out, they're like, oh, this sounds like this. Like, okay, well, I changed it in this way because you mentioned that your audience is X, Y, and Z. This
Mm-hmm.
language, based on my experience, is more catered to that type of audience, especially when it comes to sensitive topics or any kind of controversial topics. In the
Mm-hmm.
past, I've worked with those trying to write somewhat controversial ideas. It's like, okay, well, are you speaking to people who already believe this? Or are you
Mm-hmm.
speaking to those that don't believe it, but you want them to consider it, right? So since it was the latter, you need to shift your language. You can't just, I've learned even through psychology, you can't just be hard hitting with, new belief systems that are going to like completely dismantle what someone believed before, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
there's a certain level of finesse that is better suited to something like that. So those are
Mm-hmm.
certain nuances that, the language that's used, the maybe the speed at which the information is presented, right? So
Mm-hmm.
making it more digestible depending on the audience. But it's just a way of really making sure that a person's manuscript is aligned with what it is they're trying
Mm-hmm.
to do.
Mm-hmm. So what is ghostwriting? Is it something that you write a book for somebody without getting any credit?
Exactly. Well, it's writing a book for somebody. Some people do get credit, right? So if you notice, a lot of celebrities, particularly those that may not be writers by trade or in any sort of way, this happens a lot with athletes. I've seen a lot
Mm-hmm.
of athletes, you'll see, oh, by this athlete and so and so. That so and so is typically the ghostwriter who
Oh,
is there, a part of the
when they
process
write the
where
memoir or biography.
exactly, right? Like a memoir, a
Yeah.
biography, an
Mm-hmm.
autobiography. If it
Mm-hmm.
says the celebrity's name and somebody else, usually that somebody else is the ghostwriter, right? Some
Mm-hmm.
ghostwriters are publicly known. Like I said, it happens a lot with certain celebrities, like athletes, who like, they're not claiming to be writers. They just want to share their story. So they'll often work with a ghostwriter who writes on their behalf. So some ghostwriters are listed, right? They're given credit in the publication. Some ghostwriters are completely secret, right? Because the
Mm-hmm.
idea for some is that they want to write a book, but they want to publish it fully under their name, and they just need help with the writing process. So with a ghostwriter, at least in my experience, it has been, all right, you tell me the story, I'm going
Mm-hmm.
to write it.
So how long you been doing this?
Like offering these kinds of services.
Yes, yes.
I would say ever since I got into writing, I mean, people have always kind of known that I have, some kind of inclination to write.
Mm-hmm.
But when I started studying writing, when I started pursuing my master's degree, I
Mm-hmm.
started offering, writing services. I'm like, okay, I'm into writing, I'm into editing. So since about 2013, I've been, offering different types of services, even if it's like creating a newsletter for your audience, creating
Mm-hmm.
training manuals, whatever opportunities have come up that have been related to writing and editing. Since 2013, I've been offering that as part of my services.
So you know what's happening in the field of AI. People are saying that our jobs will be displaced by AI, especially the creative
I do
one.
hear that.
Yeah. So what do you think? How safe is your job from AI?
I think ultimately, I mean, this is something that I see at the college level because a lot of students use ChatGPT, they use any kind of AI. And I actually
Hmm,
saw this awesome video by, I think it's a professor at Harvard,
hmm,
where, basically saying that AI shouldn't replace jobs, it should enhance jobs, right? Because at the end of the day, AI is not going to have, at least as it is currently, going to have that human touch, right? So they actually gave the example of a doctor
hmm,
where, we don't want AI hearing us, like, but AI can be used, by doctors because instead of a doctor looking at all their past cases for ways that this person's symptoms is similar to something they've seen and sifting through all the research, right? AI can sift through all the research, right?
hmm,
However, what the AI is going to come up with as a solution to cure it might be very different to a human doctor, right? So
hmm,
the human doctor might consider the person's situation, the person's age, get to know their family, get to know their wishes in real time. Unless you're really good at writing these prompts for AI
hmm,
and AI is really considering all these things, AI could be used to gather all that information in a quick amount of time, but the human is going to have that like bedside manner, so to speak. Right. So it's
hmm,
like in the medical field, it made me think about something. And also, like, I think that now jobs are, considering it's like, okay, write me a marketing plan. And they'll ask you to write a marketing plan, give you 5 minutes, and then they're going to consult some kind of AI and then they're going to compare. So the idea is to be better than AI because if AI did it better than you, then maybe
hmm,
you're not a fit for the job. So I think that the key here is really being like honing in on who you are and what you offer, because AI is not going to capture everything. I've heard AI songs by artists that are deceased. And while it sounds very similar to them, right, you could tell that the AI really captured them to a certain degree. It still sounds off, right? There's like this human element I see as still being something that we bring to the table that AI doesn't at the moment. So
hmm,
I think that certain sense of like human emotion, sentimentality, psychology, I think those are things, especially with writing that we can capture perhaps better than AI. AI is an amazing tool. It's very intelligent and I'm, in awe as to what it can achieve. But I do
hmm,
think that there is something to the human experience that, especially in writing, we can capture. And even if it has flaws, right, I think
hmm,
that's a testament to our humanity, right? Like having these flaws and having these areas for growth that, AI is going to, give out a perfect paper pretty much. Even if you ask it to have errors, it's going to sound awesome, right? It's going to sound, I feel like if we put our minds to creation, and just seeing what comes out of us and we take that brave, courageous approach, what's
hmm.
going to come out of us is, powerful. And so I'm, if I get replaced, I get replaced, right? But I'm not too worried about how AI is going to replace me because I think that who wants to hear Christy's voice is going to hear Christy's voice, right? Who's going to want to hear all of our voices going to seek it with each other. AI is going to maybe handle some of those tasks that maybe cut into our time, right? Like a
Mhm,
lot of research and sifting through information, understanding. And I think that humans will retain the creation part, right? Like the practical exercising of our expertise and our knowledge. I think that's where we're going to shine. So I think that as a writer and an
mhm.
editor, right, being creative with, helping someone tell their story, I like to think that my job will be secure. Right? I think I'll find creative ways to share ideas.
Mhm. So currently, what I see is that, at least in my domain, people are getting replaced or losing opportunity, not by the AI, but by those who know how to use AI tools effectively. So have you subscribed to the any AI model like Claude or GPT?
Subscribed? No, I've used some. Like I explored ChatGPT, but I don't subscribe. I know people that do, and I've seen some amazing things get created with the paid version. It's intense, just
Yeah.
how smart, how intelligent these systems are. I give, I like to think I'm like, a human created this, right? Like that, like there's some very intelligent brains creating this
Mhm.
system, right? Very awesome computer people. for, pardon my ignorant language, but, you know, very technologically savvy people that created this system that is
Yep.
so amazing at creating things. So I saw it with the paid version and I'm just in awe at what it can create. But yeah, me personally, I don't subscribe. Like I said, I've dabbled into it. I've used it, especially as, the working at a school, you
Mm.
have to be aware of what students are engaging with. So, even for
Mhm.
research purposes, I've seen it, but I don't subscribe to it at the
Mhm.
moment.
Writers are generally use this tool for the grammar because before the ChatGPT, there was a tool called Grammarly. People often use
Hmm.
Grammarly to correct their grammar and something like that. Nowadays, they are reluctant to use ChatGPT or Claude or something similar tool because they think that once they put their story or to that system, the AI will observe all their story and the model will trained by your data, So that's why they are kind of reluctant to work with this AI tools.
I would be too. It becomes
Yeah,
a part of the database, right? That
yeah.
these systems use to answer other people's prompts. And even though our work is probably out there, especially
Hmm.
if you publish it on any kind of public place, it becomes a part of this web of information that
But
it can reference.
yep.
But yeah, I do know people use it. Even Grammarly, I still see Grammarly used here. Although I
Hmm.
will say, even Grammarly, which is a form of artificial intelligence,
Yeah.
something that I do notice that it will do is that it will change your voice. So, Grammarly, I've
Hmm.
seen, even if Grammarly was like on the computer at school and it's like trying to change my words, like it's very common for me to say like, have a great day, right? That's
Hmm.
just like a phrase that I say. And Grammarly will try to change it to have a wonderful day. And then I'm like,
Hmm.
no, I don't want the person to have a, it's like, it's amazing how AI will try to change your language because it believes that it's giving you a more specific word to use or anything like that, like which I can understand it can be helpful, but we have to be careful not to let artificial intelligence change our voice, right? Our voice is unique. How we speak
Hmm.
is unique. So I think that it's important that we can consider these as options for assistance, right? If we forget the grammar rules, if we, need a bit of assistance with making sure our writing is ready for publication. But definitely I would say be very careful with how these artificial intelligence platforms change your work. Just
Hmm.
be, read it over. I would say, if you're going to run it through anything, read it, see how it sounds, see if it's still you, see what
Hmm.
changed, and before you publish anything, because you really don't want it to change your work and then you turn it in just like that. I see students do that all the time. And I'm
Hmm.
like, no, you don't even know what this word means, because I'll ask them about it and they can't even just like explain to me what that sentence says,
Hmm.
and I'll say, okay, like this doesn't serve you, right? If you're going to
Hmm.
be using any kind of artificial intelligence for assistance, be very mindful how you're using it and be very intentional with how you're using it, even if it's just to proofread your work.
Hmm.
Because at the end of the day, it's going to say your name on it, right? And I think that we should be very proud of the work that we produce. And if
Yep.
anybody was to question you about your work, you should be ready to answer,
Hmm.
So I try to motivate my students, like, even if you use these platforms, it has to be yours, right? Like, you cannot possibly say that you did this. Like, no, ChatGPT did it, right? Like,
Hmm.
they're the ones that are very prolific writers, right? ChatGPT is very prolific,
Hmm.
publishing a lot of things, coming up with a lot of
Yep.
ideas.
Yep.
I'm like, how do you, like, for me, I'm like, how would I be able to sleep at night if all I turned in was, maybe everybody has different beliefs
Hmm.
about it. But for me, when it comes to like creating, especially in a writing course,
Hmm.
to me, I much rather see a person's genuine thoughts and work with them on that, right? Even if it could use a little bit of improvement or a lot of bit of improvement, I
Hmm.
like to see where a person's really at because that's the only way that I can really help them. Just like in, a psychological setting or like a therapy setting, NLP setting,
Hmm.
I can't
Hmm.
possibly, help somebody if they're making things up and they're just saying what they think I want to hear. There's no way
Hmm.
I can help them. Right. So with
Hmm.
ChatGPT, like there's no way I can help you if you just give me a ChatGPT essay. So I understand the reluctance. I'm reluctant to it. I'm like, be mindful, make sure that you don't get lost in the sauce. Like, it's like corny to say, but make sure that you are always there. Like, you're very special. You are a person. Make
Hmm.
sure no matter what platform you use, any kind of assistance, that it's ultimately you that's being shared on the
Hmm.
page.
Yep. 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 Would you consider the AI tool if that is completely private, if there is no fear of losing your data?
I don't think so. Like, as at least as it is right now, the way I engage with it,
Hmm.
sometimes it's just like brainstorming or like looking for formats. There are
Hmm.
times where I'm like, please give me a sample format for a workshop, a 20-minute workshop. right?
Mhm.
Where, because sometimes I'll have to create a workshop and to kind of like a search engine,
Yeah.
and, because I could easily Google it, but it's nice to see the type of content that ChatGPT uses. So I've used
Mhm.
it for things like that, but even if I think it was private, I'm very much like about seeing what comes on the page naturally, right?
Mhm.
I'm very, I've been through a lot to get to where I'm at today.
Mhm.
And one of the greatest things I've overcome is the sense of feeling like I lost myself, right? Or I'm not being honest with myself and with others about who I am. So
Mhm.
maybe it's not that serious to other people, but for me, just because of
It's
what
kind of
I've
an
been through,
ethical question.
yeah, it just kind of feels like I shouldn't be doing that,
Yeah.
like as it is right now. Like I said, I can use it for certain techniques and certain strategies, like especially
Mhm.
with like a search engine, but as far
Mhm.
as like creating my own stories, I'll
Mhm.
just open up Word and just start writing.
Yeah. Yeah.
I won't consult
Yeah.
any kind
Yeah.
of prompt.
This makes sense. That's an interesting perspective on AI. On a side note, since we are talking about the private AI, I want to say that you can totally have your own private chat GPT on your personal computer for free and it's completely offline. Models like Llama, Mistral are some open source alternatives to ChatGPT, and they are just as powerful as GPT 3.5, if not more. This is really happening.
That's amazing.
So, Christina, what advice would you give to someone who wants to write a book, just like me?
I would say, you know, really, I guess kind of piggybacking off of what I said earlier,
Hmm,
just making sure your vision is clear as to what the goal is in writing this book, whether it's to share the message with a certain audience or it's to achieve a certain goal. Like for me, it was overcoming difficult experiences.
hmm,
And really keep that vision in mind when the days come where you don't want to write.
hmm,
For me, there were times like I mentioned in this call where I just didn't want to even go there. But I kept that vision in my sights. I had that vision in mind where I knew what the end game was, and it was healing. And I knew that writing this book was going to provide a certain opportunity for me. And a lot of times, even growing up, it was hard for me to finish projects, So
hmm,
the fact that I was going to finish it was a huge sense of accomplishment for me. So I
hmm,
kept that in mind. And every time that I struggled, I just kept, I would reflect on that, be like, okay, why am I doing this? And
hmm,
when I would reflect on what was the goal there, it
hmm,
would always refocus me back and I would be invigorated. And it helped me write my book. So I would suggest it to anybody. Like if you remember why you're doing what you're doing, you're always gonna be, you'll be able to achieve it. And if you don't, you can give me a call. I'll help
hmm.
you get it done.
Yep, yep, yep.
You know.
So, Christina, we are on the final segment of the podcast. This segment we call the
Okay.
rapid fire, or
Wow.
often we call it instant insights.
Right.
Yeah. So I will fire off quick question to you, and you have to respond as fast as you can.
Wow. No pressure.
So, are you ready?
Yes.
Coffee or tea?
Coffee.
Cats or dogs?
Dogs, for sure.
Yeah. Beach or mountains?
Beach.
City or countryside?
City.
Hmm.
It changes. Sorry. That's a
It's
tough
okay.
one. That's a tough one. I love the city, but man, I love to ride horses and like have some peace and quiet. So it's a tough one.
Blue or green?
Green.
Early bird or night owl?
Night owl.
Fame or money?
Oh my gosh. I mean, honestly, I think as like an artist, I think I would say fame, not for glory purposes,
Hmm.
but I think that sometimes I know that's like not a rapid fire answer,
Hmm.
but sometimes I admire the audacity for some writers to,
Hmm.
put their work out there despite not having much.
Hmm.
And I think that, if a message needs to be shared, I'm okay just sharing the message.
Yep,
It's
yep,
not
yep.
about like an ego thing, I would say, as far as fame, but I can see myself being in the public eye and sharing a message. So if that would be fame, then I would go with that.
In any creative field, you seek the people, the audiences. The more fame you got, the
Exactly.
more audiences you will get. So yeah,
Exactly, right? So it's like
yeah.
it's not even it could even be it's not even about like I said, just it's I wouldn't say famous for fame's sake, but
Yep.
I do think that, yeah, reaching the audience is important.
Yep. If you could change three things about the world, what would it be?
Three things about the world. Um,
Mhm.
I would give people the eyes to see themselves clearly, the eyes to see others clearly,
Hmm.
and open hearts to understand each other better.
Hmm. If you could have any superpower, what would it be?
Reading minds.
I mean, that's easy, I would say.
Right? Like first thing I think of.
Yep, I'm just kidding. Yep. Travel back in time or forward in time?
Back in time.
Is there any specific era you want to experience?
Not necessarily. Oh, I mean, well, actually, yeah, I would love to go back to the time of the Renaissance. I think that there was a lot of information there that can be applied now. But sometimes I think, I mean, with my own type of writing, I love to go back into my own history. I have like a habit of thinking back of how things became the way that they are. So it's like naturally an inclination to go back in time. Although sometimes I do go forward in time based on what's happening right now. I
Hmm.
can kind of like forward project. But I think that in general, I'd be interested to see how things came to be. So
Hmm.
looking into the past is sometimes an interesting way to do that.
Hmm. So, if you could go to past and meet yourself, what advice would you like to give yourself?
I would say like stay home more. Like do not be so anxious to leave. I had a hard time being at my house because sometimes I didn't feel so awesome at my house. But if I would have stayed home and focused, put more energy into getting closer to the people closest to me, like my
Hmm.
parents and my relatives in general,
Hmm.
and focusing on those core relationships instead of escaping by going out and um, engaging with others maybe in ways when I wasn't really ready to. If I would have stayed home, I could have avoided,
Hmm.
a multitude of problems. If I would have focused on myself
Hmm.
more than what it is I thought I wanted, and like made it more about like self-reflection and self-discovery as opposed to achieving certain goals that I felt I had to achieve because of my age and because of things like that, I
Hmm.
would have been spared so much heartache. So I would tell myself back then, like,
Hmm.
focus more on you. I tell it to myself now, right?
Hmm.
Instead of making it so much about the end game, like, look inside, like, really reflect on what's happening anytime something comes up and, sit with yourself, and I think that if in the past, like, I really could have used that, stay home, be with yourself, and,
Hmm.
be safe and cute.
If you could have any dinner guest, dead or alive, who would it be?
Oh, dinner guest. Um, That's a good question. Like, who would I want to talk to? I feel like there's so many people I could talk to. You know, I would have never thought that I would say this, but it probably has a lot to do with the fact that what I've been doing lately. But I would say like Ernest Hemingway. It's funny, like I don't know too much about him. Like I know like enough that maybe the general person knows. But it's funny, I spent the weekend in the Keys last week and I was in Key West and I did the Hemingway run. And
Mhm.
even though I haven't read all of his books or anything like that, being in that area and knowing that he had a table in Key West that was designated to his writing, and just like the little that I do know, it seemed like he was like a man with a plan, like a man with a purpose, a man
Mhm.
writing his stories, and he made a home for himself in these different places in the world. And I would really like to kind of pick his brain, get to know him a little bit better, and just understand like how he was, how he came to be, and what inspired him to be the prolific writer that he was. And I don't know, I feel like he'd be really interesting. So like I said, it could have to do with the fact that I just did that 5K that was themed by him. I mean, he's been like top of mind lately, but that's who I would probably want to have over for dinner and have a conversation with.
Mhm. Most challenging part of your job.
I would actually say AI right now.
Hmm. Most rewarding part of your job.
Seeing the moment when a student learns, right? When they grab a concept and it
Hmm.
clicks, that to me is very rewarding.
Hmm. Reading or writing?
Writing.
Favorite book of all time?
That's a good question. I've always said, oh, okay. So my I'll go with my first favorite book. Was actually Message in a Bottle. And the reason it was my favorite
Bottle.
book is because it was the first book to make me cry. Yeah,
Hmm.
by Nicholas Sparks, Message in a Bottle. It's the first book to make me cry. It got
Hmm.
me into reading.
Hmm. Okay. Favorite movie of all time?
What Dreams May Come.
Book that you regret reading?
Book that I regret reading? I don't think I have one, to be honest. Writing involves so much that I don't regret. I may not finish every book, but I don't regret starting any
Okay.
book.
Movie that you regret watching?
Same. Like,
Okay.
I don't think there's a book or a movie that I regret watching, even if I didn't like it. I always learned
Okay.
something.
Okay. So according to you, which is the most overrated book or movie?
The most overrated?
Yep.
Oh, man, I don't know. I don't think like that. It's hard to know. I can't think of anything right now of overrated.
History or fantasy?
History,
Fiction or non-fiction?
nonfiction,
First draft or final edits?
first draft,
Favorite writing spot? Home or cafe?
cafe, for sure.
Writing in silence or with music?
Silence,
Character development or world building?
character development, for sure.
Personal experience or pure imagination?
Personal experience.
Best thing about being a writer?
Discovering and sharing who you are
Worst thing about
in
being
an
a
art.
writer?
Sharing and who you are. I would say, I mean, I love it now. Now I live off of it, but it can be, you know, you can be putting yourself in a vulnerable position
Mhm,
and you have to be ready for it, I would say. Yeah.
mhm. Best president of US?
No, I wouldn't even know where to begin. I've so been out of touch. But I know I do have an affinity for pioneers in life. So sometimes I think about, and I saw the show Hamilton and thinking about George Washington and those
Mm,
early founders of how brave they were to, you know, come over here and do everything that they did. So I have
mhm.
a certain connection to somebody leading the way. So I think it's cool that
Yeah.
Washington started things with the
Mhm.
rest of them.
Okay. So, Christina, that's the end of the rapid fire.
Oh, thank you.
I hope it was fun.
Yeah, it was good. Sometimes I think I'm I don't know if he wants one word answers, but sometimes I like to share. So
Okay, so one last question. We are on the final question of the podcast. What's the best piece of advice you have ever received?
I don't even know who I received this from, to be honest. It's just what's coming to my head, but go for it. I don't know if
Mhm,
this is advice that my brain gave itself.
mhm,
Um, but I would say go for it. I think about what's the worst that can happen, right? Even if we mess up, I have a lot of experience messing up, and making mistakes with people and making mistakes, maybe out of ignorance of not knowing the best way to do something. But there's no way to know what you're capable of unless you go for it. So I would say that just taking a chance and doing something and taking that step forward towards something you are feeling called to do or something that's within you that wants to come through is the best thing. It's kind of, like I said, a certain phrase that's played within me. Like I said, I don't know exactly the origin, but it's something that has pushed me along and helped me be brave and, share my story and just be myself ultimately.
That's really a valuable advice. Thanks for sharing.
Thank you.
So that's it. That's the end of the podcast. Christina, any final
Yeah,
thought?
thank you. Thank you for having me. This has been honestly a lot of fun, talking to you, getting to know you, and, sharing in this way. It's been awesome.
Yeah, same here.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. If you are on YouTube, please subscribe to Shree's podcast, The Billion Insights. If you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, please take a moment to rate us 5 stars if you enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you, Kristina. Thank you so much for sharing your insight with us today. Your unique perspective on psychology and writing has given our audience a deeper understanding of both fields. We are excited to see what the future holds for you, and we wish you all the best.
Thank you so much. I'm really grateful to be on here and sharing with you and learning from you also. So thank you again for having me.
Thanks for joining us. And our listener, if you want to know more about Kristina and her work, all the links can be found on the description. See you next time on the Billion Insight podcast. Until next time, dream big and work hard. This is Sri, your host, signing out. Peace.